Okay, let's dive in. You know when people say, oh, just be more present.
Yeah, it sounds simple, right?
Right. But you kind of think, well, what does that really mean, like, in practice? Am I just supposed to focus harder, shut things out? Or is it something else?
It's a great question. And, the source we're digging into today, it comes at it from a really different angle. Kind of radical, actually.
How so?
It basically challenges that whole idea that presence is something your mind can figure out or, do through effort. It suggests it's, well, something else entirely.
Okay, I like that. It flips the usual script.
Yeah.
So for this deep dive, we're really focusing just on this one source, this specific piece of writing.
Exactly.
We want to unpack its core ideas, explore what it says presence is, what it definitely isn't, and crucially, why this source thinks it's so important.
Think of it as a journey, maybe, into a different way of experiencing things, using these insights as our guide.
Yeah, and maybe you've been there, right? You try to meditate or just be here now and boom, grocery list. Or you replay that awkward conversation from yesterday.
Totally. Or you just wonder, am I even feeling this presence thing? Is this it?
Exactly. So hopefully this drive might shed some light, maybe offer some surprising perspectives, perhaps reveal moments where you've already touched this state
Mm-hmm.
without quite realizing it.
Mm-hmm.
So let's jump straight into the main point because it feels like a bit of a riddle. The source says, presence is not what you think it is. That's the starting line.
That really is the foundation here, the thinking mind, the part that analyzes and labels everything. It can't get it.
It can't grasp presence.
According to the source, no. It even says understanding presence is being present. It's not an idea to figure out intellectually. It's a state you enter.
Okay, but if the mind can't grasp it,
Yeah.
how do we even approach it?
Well, the source gives this really neat little experiment, almost playful. It suggests you just, close your eyes and ask yourself, I wonder what my next thought will be. And then
You just wait.
you wait. But how you wait is key. You become super alert. Like a cat watching a mouse hole. Totally focused on seeing that next thought the moment it appears.
Okay. And what happens when you do that? What's the insight?
You find that as long as you're in that state intensely present, watching, you're actually thought-free.
Really? There's a gap.
A gap, yeah. You're incredibly still inside, but also really, really alert, just being in that space before the thought comes.
That doesn't last forever, presumably.
No. The source says the moment your attention dips even slightly, bam,
Okay.
thought rushes right back in. The noise starts up again, the stillness goes, and you're back in, well, regular time, psychological time.
That makes me think of that wild example the source uses
Yeah.
about Zen masters.
Oh, yeah. The stick.
Hitting students with a stick
Oh,
sounds intense.
it does, but it was a teaching method, apparently, a test of presence.
How so?
The idea was, if the student was truly present, fully in the in, now aware, they'd sense the master coming, they'd notice the energy shift, be alert.
They dodge the stick, like Jesus' analogy, keeping your lamp burning.
Exactly, keeping their loin girded and lamp burning, utterly alert, ready. But if they got whacked,
Then they were lost in thought, absent.
that was the sign, yeah. Lost in thought, absent, basically unconscious in that moment, according to the source.
So how do we cultivate that kind of presence day to day without needing a Zen master lurking around?
Well, the source talks about being deeply rooted within yourself.
Rooted. What does that mean practically?
It means shifting some attention into your body. Not thinking about it, but actually feeling it from the inside. Feeling that inner energy field.
Ah, okay. Body awareness.
Yeah. It acts like an anchor. It connects you physically to this moment, the now. Makes presence feel less like just an idea in your head.
So presence is beyond thought, anchored in the body. And then the source takes this idea and applies it to waiting. It talks about an esoteric meaning of waiting. That really jumped out at me.
That's a really key distinction it makes. It's not the kind of waiting we usually do.
Like tapping your foot at the checkout,
Mm,
annoyed, impatient.
exactly. Where you're mentally already in the future, wishing the present moment would just hurry up and end. Seeing the now as like an obstacle.
But this alert waiting is totally different.
Completely, qualitatively different. It requires total alertness. The source uses this phrase, something could happen at any moment.
Wow.
And if you're not absolutely awake inside, absolutely still, you'll miss it. All your attention has to be right here, right now. There's literally no room left for daydreaming, thinking about dinner, worrying, none of it.
And what does that feel like? Is it stressful?
That's the fascinating part. No, There's an intensity, yes, but no tension, no fear, just alert presence. Your whole being is involved, every cell awake.
And the regular you, your personality.
It kind of recedes the you made up of past memories and future plans. It's barely there, but paradoxically, you feel more yourself than ever. More real, your true self, the source suggests.
And this state, this alert waiting, the source connects it back to Jesus' parables. That felt like a deep cut.
It does, yeah. It uses them to illustrate this very specific quality of presence.
Like the servant waiting for the master, who doesn't know when he'll return.
Exactly. Needs to stay awake, alert, ready, still, so they don't miss the arrival. Or the parable of the wise and foolish women with their lamps.
Right, the oil in the lamps.
The oil is consciousness, the source says. The lamp itself is presence. And the bridegroom they're waiting for. That's the, now, enlightenment. The foolish ones didn't have enough oil, enough conscious presence, so they missed it.
But here's the really striking part. The source claims these parables were fundamentally misunderstood, right from the start.
That's a huge claim it makes, yeah. It argues they aren't about some future apocalypse, the end of the physical world.
They're about.
The end of psychological time, the end of the egoic mind's dominance, the possibility of living in a totally new state of consciousness available now, that deeper, esoteric meaning, mostly missed, according to this text.
Wow, okay, so this presence, beyond thought in the body, in this alert waiting, it also connects strongly to experiencing beauty, right? Especially in nature. Our listener persona mentioned that connection.
Absolutely. Presence is key. You can't truly perceive beauty or majesty or sacredness in nature or anywhere without it. The source brings in satori.
The Zen term.
Yeah, that flash of insight. A moment of no mind, total presence. A glimpse of enlightenment, basically.
And we've probably all had moments like that,
Yeah.
without calling it satori.
Very likely. Think about being totally lost looking at the night sky. Or just hearing a bird sing, not labeling it, just hearing. Or the sound of a stream.
Okay.
To really get the essence of those things, the source says, the mind has to be quiet. You have to drop your baggage, your problems, your future worries, your past regrets, even what you know about stars or birds. Otherwise, you see but don't see, hear but don't hear. You're just seeing the label, the mental concept, not the thing itself in its business. You need total presence for the essence.
So beyond the form, the star, the bird, there's this deeper quality, an essence.
Yeah.
And it only shows up if you are present.
That's the idea. And the source even asks, could that essence and your presence actually be the same thing? Is the beauty perceived without your presence?
Huh. And when we do have those moments, staring at the stars or whatever.
You were likely in no mind, the source suggests, even for just a second or two. But the gap between that pure awareness and the thought rushing in, wow, that's beautiful, or that's the constellation Orion, that gap was probably tiny.
So it feels like seeing and thinking are simultaneous.
Right, it feels like one process, but the insight here is that the thought comes after. The labeling, the interpreting. By then, the direct experience is already fading, replaced by a memory or a concept of the beauty.
Okay, I see.
And the source links this to human depth. The wider that gap between pure perception and the thought about it, the more conscious, the more present you are.
And in our culture, which is so mind-heavy.
We often miss it. People might see a flower, label it pretty, but it's mechanical. They're not still enough inside, not present enough to really feel its essence, its aliveness, its holiness even. The source suggests maybe they can't know the flower's essence because they don't know their own essence, which is that same presence.
And this carries over into art and creativity.
Yeah, the source argues much modern art, architecture, music, it lacks that deep beauty, that inner essence. Why? Because the creators often can't get free from their own mental noise. True creativity, real beauty, it argues, comes from that inner stillness, from within. The mind left to its own devices, it creates, well, the source calls them monstrosities. Look at our cities, our industrial zones.
That's a strong point, which brings us to a really fundamental question the source tackles. Is presence the same thing as being, with a capital B?
It dives right into that. The perspective offered is this. When you become conscious of being, that awareness is being, becoming conscious of itself.
Okay.
And that, the source says, is presence. And since it uses being, consciousness, and life almost interchangeably, presence is basically consciousness waking up to itself, or life becoming self-aware.
But it warns against trying to grasp this intellectually.
Absolutely. Don't get stuck on the words. The point isn't to understand it like a concept, it's to be it.
Right. But the source also talks about consciousness evolving, which sounds a bit like even God needs time to grow. That feels different from some traditions.
It addresses that potential confusion. It clarifies that this apparent evolution, this development, is only seen from our very limited viewpoint, here in the world of forms and time.
Our manifested universe.
Exactly. From the perspective of the timeless, the unmanifested, which it calls our true home, there's no beginning or end. It all just is, eternally. But from down here, looking through the lens of time in separate forms, consciousness looks like it's unfolding, developing through different life stages.
Okay, so from our vantage point, consciousness appears to evolve and manifest.
Yes, and the source traces this. It suggests everything. Even a rock has being, has God essence, some degree of consciousness. All the forms we see, stars, planets, plants, animals, us, are expressions of this one consciousness taking form.
And the whole world is consciousness playing with forms. He uses that Indian idea, Leela.
Yeah, Leela. The divine play, like God playing a game with itself through form. A cosmic dance.
And in that dance, the individual forms. They aren't the main event.
Not ultimately, no. They're temporary costumes, temporary expressions. The source uses that little story about the fish in the aquarium.
Oh, yeah, the one named John.
Right. You see it born, you give it name, a tiny history, and then gulp, it gets eaten minutes later.
And we might think, oh, poor John, how tragic.
But the source suggests that feeling of tragedy only comes if you impose a separate fixed self onto that fleeting form. If you forget it's just consciousness, God essence, playing a role for a moment, you've mentally frozen a tiny part of this dynamic dance and made it into a separate thing.
And the human condition right now is that we do that. We identify completely with our forms.
That's the core of the issue, according to this source. Consciousness gets totally lost in its costumes, the physical body, the mental structures of the ego. It forgets what it is and knows itself only as this temporary form.
And that leads to fear.
Deep, underlying fear of annihilation, fear of the form ending. And this is where the source says dysfunction, suffering, all of that begins. It looks like something went wrong, but maybe even this dysfunction is part of the game, part of Lila.
But the suffering isn't just pointless. It serves a purpose in this cosmic game.
A crucial one, yes. The sheer pressure of suffering caused by identifying so strongly with form actually forces consciousness to start pulling back, to disidentify.
Like being shaken awake.
Exactly, shaken out of the dream of form. Suffering pushes consciousness to look for something deeper, something beyond the temporary self it thought it was.
And it wakes up, but on a deeper level than before.
Precisely. The source uses the parable of the lost son beautifully here.
Leaves home, wastes everything, suffers.
Right, leaves unconscious perfection, goes through apparent imperfection and suffering, and that very suffering drives the return home, but now to conscious perfection, deepened by the whole experience.
And this links all the way back to that simple practice of watching your thoughts.
Directly. Watching the mind isn't just a self-help trick here. It's framed as cosmically significant.
How so?
Every time you choose to observe your thoughts instead of being swept away by them, you're withdrawing consciousness from those mental forms. That withdrawn consciousness becomes the watcher, the witness, pure awareness beyond form.
Doing that strengthens the watcher.
It strengthens the watcher, the presence, and weakens the grip of the mental patterns, the egoic structures. So, through individuals choosing presence, consciousness itself is waking up from being lost in form.
So watching your mind is part of the end of the world.
In the sense the source means it, yes. It foreshadows and participates in the end of psychological time, the end of humanity's collective identification with the egoic mind.
That's a huge concept.
Right.
And the source is pretty blunt about the stakes if this shift doesn't happen, right?
Yeah, it doesn't pull punches. If consciousness stays trapped in the ego, identified with form, the trajectory is self-destruction.
We see glimpses of that.
Increasing confusion, conflict, violence, stress-related illness, despair, madness. The source calls the collective egoic mind the most dangerously insane and destructive entity on the planet. It's a stark warning, like arguing about deck chairs on the Titanic.
And people try to escape this pressure, right? The source mentions temporary respites.
It does. Things like sleep, obviously, but also, to some extent, sex, alcohol, drugs, ways people try to fall below the level of constant thinking.
But these aren't the answer.
They might offer a brief relief, a suppression of the noise, but they don't generate conscious presence. They don't help you rise above thought. They actually delay the necessary breakdown of the old egoic patterns, keeping us stuck.
So there's no going back to some simpler pre-thought state, like innocence.
No, the source is very clear on that. No going back. The only way is forward. Humanity has to evolve to the next stage.
And even if we don't make it.
Consciousness itself keeps evolving, the source suggests. Across the universe, no gain is truly lost. It will just find expression elsewhere.
But the fact that we're talking about this now, or that someone is listening,
That's seen as incredibly significant, a clear sign that this new consciousness, this disidentification from form, is already taking root, right here, right now.
and the teaching itself, it's not just information transfer.
No, the source has that lovely line. The teacher and the taught together create the teaching. It implies that you, the listener, are consciousness listening to itself.
Wow.
The words we're using, they aren't the truth with a capital T, they just point towards it. But crucially, if spoken from presence, the words themselves can carry the energy, the frequency of presence, beyond just their meaning.
And there's something even more potent than words.
Silence. Listening to the silence, even the silence underneath everyday noise, that's described as a direct doorway to presence.
How does that work?
The stillness awakening inside you starts to perceive the silence outside, and that inner stillness is presence consciousness free from thought forms.
The source also brings in other terms, like Christ, for people who resonate with that language.
Yes, it acknowledges that. If Christ means something deep for you, you can use it to signify your own inner God essence, your true self. Presence, in that view, is the Christ within, awakened.
And those timeless statements, before Abraham was, I am, or I am that I am.
The source interprets them not as historical claims about existing in the past or future, but as pointers to the eternal now presence.
So before Abraham was, I am means stepping out of time altogether.
That's the interpretation. And I am that I am is seen as God defining itself as pure being, pure presence, completely free from past and future. Jesus, then, is seen as someone who fully realized this divine presence, becoming a vehicle for it.
And the second coming, not a person returning.
Not an external event, no, but a transformation within human consciousness, a shift from being lost in time and thought to being grounded in presence, in pure consciousness. The source kind of asks, if Christ did return, what else could be said but, I am the truth, I am here, I am now, I am within you.
There's also a warning about how we relate to teachers or figures like Christ. Don't personalize them.
Yeah, strong caution there. Don't get fixated on the person of the teacher or avatar. Truly awakened beings, it suggests, are often simple, ordinary people because the ego isn't there.
Egos attract egos.
Something like that. And only light recognizes light. The key point is, the light, the presence, isn't outside you. It's not limited to one special person believing it is. That's ego talking.
So how should we use a teacher's presence then?
As a mirror. Let their presence reflect your own true identity back to you, beyond your name and story. Use it to help intensify your own emerging presence, remembering that presence itself is one, there's no my presence and your presence, ultimately.
And group work. Working with others on
The
this.
source sees value there, yeah. It can intensify the energy field, support individuals, help the collective shift, but it also notes the need for someone established in presence to kind of hold the space, and warns against getting dependent on the group or the teacher long term. It's a transitional support.
Wow, okay. We've covered a lot of ground there. It's a lot to take in.
It really is. We've touched on presence being something totally different from just focusing.
Right, something beyond thought,
Mm-hmm.
found in that alert waiting or anchored in the body.
And how it's the key to really seeing beauty, the essence of things.
And it's tied into consciousness itself, waking up. Part of this whole cosmic game where even suffering plays a role in pushing us beyond the ego.
Exactly. Offering a way out of the cycle of dysfunction the ego creates. And the path there can be as simple as stillness, listening to silence. Even the words we use can point the way.
So, thinking about your life, listening now,
Mm-hmm.
how might, just noticing that little gap between seeing something and thinking about it,
Yeah.
how might that change things day to day?
Or what moments of that alert waiting have you maybe already experienced? Or those times you felt utterly connected to nature's beauty? Were those glimpses of this presence perhaps unrecognized?
And that final, really provocative idea from the source. If the end of the world is actually the end of psychological time, consciousness freeing itself from form, happening through individuals like you, what does that really mean? Is that future something to hope for, or something that feels scary as old identities crumble?
Maybe, like the source suggests, the simplest thing is just to notice more, be a little more aware. Try listening, really listening, to the silence that's always, always there underneath it all.